When that Variety headline dropped calling Arcane the most expensive animated series ever with an estimated $250 million spent on its 18 episodes, I was so determined to be excited for Season 2 that I didn't bother digging any deeper into where that money was going. Season 1 was phenomenal, so it stands to reason that a great show needs a bigger budget, I thought. Well, let's just say I'm a writer, not a producer, and because of that I don't have any interest in the politics or economics that went into making the show. I'm only concerned about the show we got, and for that reason I'm going to put my little storytelling critic blinders on and give you my honest thoughts about Arcane Season 2 so far. I want to start by saying this. Nobody wanted Season 2 to be amazing more than I did. I was her biggest champion. I've been dragging people into this show for years, and no matter what I heard about the budget or the staff replacements or the fact that Season 2 was the last season could convince me that it wasn't going to be as amazing as the first. I had total faith. I went into this season wanting it to be good, because let's face it, these past few years have been shit, and we could really use a win right now. Well, the intro to Season 2 was great, because all of the characters were stripped down, which cleverly reflected how every aspect of the season felt stripped bare. As a quick aside, I just think they should have been consistent with the artistic aspects of the openings between seasons, especially if they wanted to keep the same song. It felt immediately like a drop in quality, which didn't do much for my expectations for the rest of the show. This isn't really a commentary on the visuals of the second intro, it's just a consistency thing for me. So the budget didn't go into the opening. That's fine, there are more important things to have in a show, like well-paced writing and character acting and backgrounds. So it's actually super cool how we got none of that either. Every single scene felt like a budget cut. In episode 1 alone, we had montage, budget cut disguised as artistic music video, talking heads, bizarre time skip, talking heads in a hallway, impactless character introduction, talking heads, no background, talking heads, tell don't show character introduction, montage, random fight, characters surviving via plot armor, talking heads, montage, talking heads, and then Mr. Krusty Lips over here. I'm guessing all of the budget went into the fight scene that took up a fifth of the episode, but I wish it hadn't, because we spent so much time watching everyone throw hands that we didn't spend enough time on how we got to the point that they were throwing hands in the first place. Every fight in Season 1 felt intentional, with cohesive lead-up and context, but this, as predictable as it was, felt extremely out of nowhere, much like the rest of the season. Every scene felt in media res. The thing about Season 2 so far is that all the scenes I saw clipped on Twitter before I sat down to watch the whole thing made me so excited, because in the context of Twitter it's just a clip, and I'm able to assume there's emotional buildup leading to stuff like or the problem is that these scenes immediately fell flat when put in the context of the actual show, because every scene felt like it was trying to make the exact same impact. I didn't feel anything during the moments that were clearly intended to make me feel things. Glagger's goggles? Don't care. The kiss? Garbage. The fight between Jinx and Vi? Don't even get me started. While Season 1 excelled in integrating its soundtrack with what was going on screen, a lot of the scenes that tried to do the same in Season 2 fell short for me. Jinx's intro felt empty, largely because there wasn't a background to be populated for the majority of it. This was a pretty consistent issue I had with the season as well. So many of the backgrounds felt at best boring and at worst non-existent. Falling back on metaphorical imagery to excuse this only works so often when so many of your scenes fall into this hole. The charcoal drawings in the funeral scene that kicked off episode 1 were beautiful, don't get me wrong, but the still frame traditional pieces meshed awkwardly with the 3D characters who moved at their typical frame rate, and it ended up feeling more like a PowerPoint presentation than an emotionally moving scene. I didn't understand the need to switch back and forth so frequently between Vi and Caitlyn when the scene is about Caitlyn's mom and Caitlyn's grief. I know that this situation affects Vi and must be difficult for her to experience with all of the parallels she's probably feeling to her own life and how bad she feels for her girlfriend, and she probably blames herself for not stopping Jinx or whatever, but this still really isn't about her. We could have explored that guilt or grief or whatever it is in a single shot, but instead we're distracted from Caitlyn's mourning with the constant reminder that hey, Vi's here and she has feelings too. All that is to say that as much as I want to appreciate the artistic experimentation that happened here, it felt more like a budget cut to me, and the poor timing between shots didn't do it any favors. Also, why is there a sea shanty playing during this fight?
You walk along the edge of danger.
Part 1 felt like a montage, with none of the scenes landing as hard as I feel like the writers hoped they were going to. I genuinely thought there was going to be a time skip between the end of Season 1 and the start of Season 2, because dealing with the immediate fallout, in my opinion, would have taken too much time, especially if we were already on the last season. And I was right. Part 1 felt like catch-up. The writers needed to speedrun a shit ton of information so we would have context for what happens later. And because of that condensed timeline, they ended up focusing only on those contextualizing events, to the point that the majority of this season was tell don't show. The season opens on the aftermath of the bomb inside the council house because it needed to be immediately established who survived and how. We learned 3 relevant things in that scene. Mel lived, Kiriman died, and Victor was put in the chrysalis. But these things could have been integrated just as effectively without opening on the immediate fallout. All the trailers tried to be coy about Mel surviving, but let's face it, that armor shot at the end of season 1 told us everything we needed to know. Narratively speaking, it was pretty obvious Caitlyn's mom was going to die. Victor's situation would have been the hardest to reconfigure, but I think putting him in some kind of critical condition that Jace had to slowly reconcile with the Hex Tech would have been much more impactful, because I don't really understand why Jace would decide to run Victor over to the lab instead of the hospital when all of Victor's self-experiments with the Hex Tech orb have been done in secret. When did Jace figure out that the orb would help? Because it couldn't have been when he saw it reacting to Victor, because then why would he run him to the lab to begin with? Opening on Mel's survival without dedicating any time to Vi and Caitlyn in the immediate aftermath was a bad idea. Mel represents the political aspects of the show, and I felt that using that as the hook for the start of season 2 was a pretty big fumble on the writers' parts. This is supposed to be an extremely emotional scene. Why not check in on the characters who are most profoundly entrenched in the emotional arcs of the show? Instead, we drop in to see who lived, then move on to the shitty budget cut funeral.
What is she still doing here?
I asked the same exact question. How long has Vi been lurking around their mansion? It must have taken at least a week to set up that funeral. Am I to assume she's just been chilling in Caitlyn's room this whole time? What happened to Jinx? Why didn't they throw down with her right after she shot the council house? How did they get back to topside after a terrorist attack and the blown up bridge and all the guards blocking the border? What did they talk about during that time? Did they talk at all? I wanted a time skip, but I wanted one that made more sense, not less. The show felt like it was trying so hard to get past the aftermath of the big bombing that I have to wonder why they bothered showing us any of it in the first place. The timeline is impossible to track. Part 1 jumps from scene to scene and between different characters so quickly that I just gave up trying to figure out how much time was passing between events at all. The viewer is allowed no time to sit with any of their emotions. The intro for episode 2 tried really hard to give us that emotional Jinx and Silco scene, but between the soliloquy and the grayscale flashbacks and the water metaphors, it just ended up feeling like another cheap metaphor-heavy recap of things we already experienced at the end of season 1. It was fine, I guess, it just didn't really do much for me. I'm aware this show is based on the League of Legends video game. I know that these characters that have no significance to me probably mean something to a lot of you, but this fact was never a crutch that Season 1 fell back on. Season 1 was successful because it told an entirely self-contained story and it took its time getting to where it needed to be. So far, Season 2 has been the opposite for me. Half of the scenes felt more like music videos or fanfiction excerpts than cinema. Characters are introduced that never have any dialogue for reasons I can only assume are relevant to the League of Legends lore. The 2D integration feels more like an effort to cut corners than an artistic decision. The dialogue is entirely focused on dropping one-liners or would-be heavy hitters, but never surrounds those lines with anything else. So all of the talking is either a monologue, a soliloquy, or a couple of characters shooting trite quips back and forth. All of the heavy lifting seems to be done by context that people who have never played the game won't have, and the story has greatly suffered for it. One of the biggest problems I had with this season was how frequently new characters were introduced without any proper introduction. Again, I know a lot of these characters are here because they're relevant in the game, but without the proper context provided in the show, it just doesn't make sense to involve them at all. The drunkard was given the classic no face shown until the big reveal treatment, which leads me to assume he's someone people who have played the game will recognize. I thought he was supposed to be someone all the viewers would recognize, so I was shocked when he turned out to be some rando we had never seen before. I like his depressed dad figure vibes, but those are just vibes. We don't actually know anything about him. The Fishman is cool and I like him a lot, but once again, I'm frustrated by his existence at all because he doesn't provide anything to the narrative. Maddie is cute, but while she contributes the most out of the new task force trio, her introduction is overshadowed by the fact that everything she says is an exposition dump, meant to fill Vi and the viewer in on an exchange between Caitlyn and the council that I would have killed to see. Yet another narrative shortcut that cheated us out of any real emotional scene. Top 10 things I would have rather seen than this. Just tell me. The entire task force lacks any real substance in the context of the show, so instead of introducing a cast of endearing characters for me to get attached to, the writers ended up clogging valuable screen time with characters I have no interest in, wasting time that could have been used to give more impact to the scenes between characters we're already invested in. But they're not even the worst offenders. The music video that kicks off episode 2 really bothered me. Not just because it was another epic scene of characters walking around looking sad with no backgrounds, mixed in with a PowerPoint of characters who are supposed to matter that end up meaning nothing to me, but because of how Isha's character is thrown into the fray. I once again don't know anything about her. I only know her name at all because I saw it floating around in the comments of fan edits made on behalf of Isha and Jinx's new whatever it is. That said, I feel that this puts me in the appropriate position to bitch about how unimpactful her character is to me. We don't know why she's being chased by one of the slumlord's goons. She conveniently falls into Jinx's life and sticks to her after that, but the only time Jinx really acknowledges her is to go on her cringy emo rant.
Best feeling in the world, kid.
And yeah, she hangs around after that apparently, even though she's not there during the gas attack. She shows up again to throw a paint bomb during the fight against the rat boy genius, and like, okay, I'm all for it. She's super cute and I love her and I want to be invested in her. But just like everyone on the task force, she's been shoehorned into a narrative that so far hasn't used her as anything other than a weak mirror for Jinx to stare into. After the fight, Savika and Jinx have their heart-to-heart, and Kid is just standing there hanging around, and neither of them even mentions it. It's like she's not even there, and the lack of acknowledgement only contributes to the feeling that her presence contributes nothing to the narrative. The only time anyone ends up acknowledging Isha is when she jumps in to save Jinx, but that scene is still more about everyone else than it is about her. I'm sure we'll get more of her throughout the rest of the season, but character introductions aren't something to just gloss over for the sake of moving the plot along, and unfortunately, that's what every character intro felt like it was doing here in Part 1. The dialogue especially was painful to listen to. It felt like everything each character had to say was an artless execution of info-dumping, telling the audience what had happened and how to feel about it.
Caitlin made quite a scene at the station when they tried to deny your enlistment. She said, if every enforcer had a heart like yours, we could take on Noxus itself. Then she threatened to withdraw her family's funding.
Now there's a conversation I would have liked to see. I cannot believe they just skimmed over a scene of Caitlin defending Vi in front of the council and instead slid that in for another character's introduction. Vi joining the Enforcers was an excruciatingly pointless internal character conflict. It should have taken way more time to explore that internal torment than a fight with her girlfriend, a drinking buddy, and a random memorial terrorist attack. Why would they cheat us of that confrontation? Caitlin defending Vi to the council could have been such an impactful, emotionally charged scene that showed us how much they mean to each other, how Kate is handling her new position of power, and Vi's internal struggle with wanting to stop Jinx but not wanting to compromise her ideals. Can you imagine the emotion in that scene? We could see Caitlin's rage, and instead of having everything spelled out for us by some third party, we might be left with the question, is Caitlin doing this because she loves and trusts Vi, or because she sees Vi as a means to an end? That would have been a fantastic thematic thread for the two of them to follow for their emotional arc in Part 1. Instead, they brushed over it just to introduce these three characters who never get named in the show. Three characters who, by the way, are only introduced to join Caitlin and Vi's task force and then are immediately thrust to the side so that Vi and Caitlin can have their 2-on-2 with Savika and Jinx at the end. If these characters are so important that they need to be introduced more than we need to see the actual confrontation with Caitlin and the council on Vi's behalf, then it might be a good idea to give them a little more significance than whatever character backstory I'm assuming they're trying to keep consistent with the League of Legends lore.
Yep, that's me. You ever need to curse a sibling or a family or a society? My card.
Jinx sounds like the opening of an early 2000s teen rom-com. Yeah, that's me. You're probably wondering how I got here. Don't worry though, because she doesn't waste our time describing how she got here, nor does the story ever quite fill us in. Somehow we just have to appreciate that she dropped the bomb, went home to mope, and then picked up a stray during a montage dedicated to showing us who the new villains of the Underground are.
She dies and leaves this giant hole, and I'm just supposed to fill it.
You won't. The hole gets smaller, but you never fill it.
This is probably my favorite example of dialogue that got shoehorned into a completely irrelevant conversation. Caitlin is talking about trying to fill the role her mother left behind in the council, and Vi responds to a completely different context, saying, "Don't worry, the grief gets easier, but it never goes away." That's not what she's saying, Vi. And listen, I know that if I wanted to really dig deep and give this exchange the benefit of the doubt, I could say that Vi is maybe referring to how she had to fill in Vander's shoes by taking over his authority after he died. But Vi was thrown in prison before she actually had to worry about any of that, and she never ended up taking over as a significant figure in the Undercity in the same way that Jinx ended up doing. Vi is definitely referring to how the hole she feels grieving her parents and Vander and everyone else has become more manageable, but never fully went away. And while that's a touching line, I guess, it makes no sense in the context of Caitlin's frustration about trying to take over the family business.
I must say goodbye to this place now. To you.
Goodbye!
I still don't really understand why Jace took Victor to the Hex Core to begin with, because I don't see when he ever had time to read Victor's notes before he had to save his life with it. That aside, this whole Yaoi breakup scene is so bizarre to me. Victor wakes up as depressed Jesus and decides to just leave everyone behind, and Jace predictably makes it all about himself. Jace spends more time looking at Victor's hexcock than he did trying to understand Victor's feelings. The absolute lack of effort to communicate was mind-numbing, and it once again felt like the writers were just trying to move things along so that they could focus on what happens next.
Here, brand new cocktail, all the rage. That should be all you need to shut Sallow down.
Yeah, I have no idea what these people are talking about. Like, I get that Mel is trying to get the dirt on her mom, but I don't know why Mel has connections to this absolute diva, or why it's so important to poison Zalo, or why any of this is happening to begin with. All I know is that if this catgirl dies, this show is completely dead to me, because she was the only thing holding this random conversation out of the gutter.
Did you truly believe Piltover was beyond our reach?
So I guess this scene was intended to show us why Mbessa is hiding out in Piltover, but once again the lack of context just left me more confused than if it hadn't been there at all. It sounds like her goal is to protect Mel at the expense of anything and anyone else, which she proves later when she sets up Caitlyn as her next sacrificial lamb, but for as much information as we got out of this scene, it still ended up feeling rushed in the context of the surrounding show.
Everyone in my life has changed. Promise me you won't change. I won't.
Yeah, this sucked. Sorry, Kate Vi fans. I promise I'm one of you, but this scene was actually less romantic than every fleeting glance these two shared throughout the entirety of season 1 by miles. And once again, the problem lies in the context of the show. This whole kiss was out of nowhere. For all of the screen time Vi and Kate have had in the season so far, they haven't really spent much of it alone together or having many meaningful interactions. The show's pace has picked up so fast that it can't seem to keep up with the characters it's already invested in, and as a result, a scene that should have been extremely satisfying just ended up falling flat. In true sapphic fashion, season 1 was chock full of tantalizing emotional tension between these two. It's one of my personal favorite aspects of queer media, actually, how the historical taboo surrounding queer romance has forced artists to become subtle and creative with how they explore love between two women or men. Without the ability to show two girls kissing right in your face, romance is explored in other ways, and as a result, to me, often feels far more genuine. This was a strategy season 1 excelled in. Season 2, however, did not allow us any time to trudge through the mire of Caitlyn and Vi's complicated feelings. The kiss lacked romance because it was an inherently romantic gesture thrown into a scene that provided none of the buildup I would expect leading up to a first kiss. It was meant to act as a stand-in for any actual emotional development, an easily recognizable romantic action to tell the audience they like each other rather than put in any of the effort to show it. It was representational, so it ended up feeling hollow instead of feeling like the culmination of all the intense feelings we got out of season 1.
I keep telling myself that you're different, but you're not. It's her blood in your veins.
Because she stopped you from killing a child? I am once again begging the writers to slow these conversations down. They're so focused on getting to the climax of each individual scene that the lead-up feels contrived and irrelevant. Vi's breakdown feels weak because every conversation they've had up to this point has been weak. I'm just not moved the way I want to be. I promise I'm trying. This just gave me the ick, sorry. I know they did this in season 1, but the framing here was just way more awkward than it was intimate to me. And if that was intentional, then kudos, I guess, but I hated it.
We don't hand over our people.
Savika had me for a second with the closest thing we got to a solid scene, but it was immediately ruined by her soliloquy and the ensuing back and forth she had with Jinx.
I can't believe you're dead, and I'm still mopping up your messes.
About now, he'd have me all over the lanes, running his collections.
Building his weapons.
Making his deals.
Exploding his enemies.
I feel like this wasn't enough to earn their camaraderie. I don't know how many times I can say I felt nothing watching this without sounding like a broken record, but just understand the sentiment remains throughout the whole show.
You need not suffer anymore.
Yeah, I don't really give a fuck about Jesus Victor Christ. Sorry, like, bye. Christ, okay. Where do I even begin with this one? Can someone explain to me why the first confrontation between Vi and Jinx since the Tea Party had to be bogged down by Savika and Caitlyn? I felt like their drama got totally overshadowed by the scuffle Caitlyn and Savika were having, and that scuffle was somehow more intense than the sisterly throwdown happening 50% in the background. Well, I say somehow, but the reason is because the Jinx-Vi fight was largely made up of still-frame pre-clash poses that felt more like promotional art than actual scenes in the show. The physical hits felt silly instead of impactful. Like, look at that. Cliche, absurd. I can't. I literally felt more like I was watching a YouTube PMV than the highest budget animation ever made. I saw someone talking about how the fighting between Vi and Jinx was great because their hits were so weak and haphazard that you could tell they didn't want to fight each other, and I just can't agree. Whether or not they wanted to fight each other was not a question I found myself entertaining because I was so focused on how bad the choreography was. The fight wasn't pathetic because their hearts weren't in it. The fight was pathetic because it was overshadowed by Caitlyn and Savika and because it depended so heavily on the characters' weapons and their flashy poses. And not to hate on the soundtrack, but the song in the scene just didn't do it for me. I haven't really mentioned much about the Hex Core or any of the science shit that Jace, Heimerdinger, and Echo have been up to now, but that's largely because that whole aspect of the show has been extremely uninteresting to me and difficult to follow. Not for lack of interest in the subject, mind you. Season 1 was extremely successful in introducing its science/magic system and easing the viewer into understanding what's going on with Hex Tech. Season 2, by comparison, is throwing Jace back and forth between being pro-Hex Tech and anti-Hex Tech with a speed that makes my head spin. By the time we get to the final battle and Jace, Echo, and Heimerdinger are hanging out in the giant Hex Nexus that I guess powers the teleportation or whatever, well, by then they've already lost me, and I'm just trying to focus on what's going down with our girls. I see a lot of people enjoying how cool this fight was and how epic the Hex Core scene integration was, but I just can't get into it. It felt like a watered-down version of so many of the best fights we've seen previously in the show. The attempts at building tension in the beginning with Jinx speaking off-screen fell flat for me, especially when compared with the last time she tried that trick at the tea party. I wish I could like the little shimmer-powered jump Jinx does, but it just felt like a silly flair added to a scene that could have been grittier and more visceral without it. The boys in the Hex Core felt silly. Jinx's little Fortnite emote made me cringe. The most interesting part of the fight for me is the glimpse we catch of Vi and Jinx fighting like siblings by the altar, but immediately after that Caitlyn intervenes, and Jinx's dialogue just feels like she's giving up too fast, like an ending we didn't deserve.
I'm glad it's you. Had to be you.
I'm torn here because I do like that dialogue. I just wanted a little more fight before that. Anyways, then Savika saves them by setting off the most plot-convenient explosion in the show's history, and the wind goddess or whatever blows the whole conflict away. We get the most pointless breakup in Yuri history, and Caitlyn becomes Piltover Hitler's figurehead. All in all, I walk away from the fight feeling almost as uninterested as I felt in Zon Jesus. I'm not interested in the politics that went down behind the scenes during the creation of this show. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters to me is the final product, and after the absolute phenomenon that was Season 1, suffice it to say that I'm more than disappointed in how Season 2 has started out. There's still time to turn it around, I guess. Now that we've wasted the first 3 episodes getting all of our exposition out of the way, maybe we'll be able to dig back into the story, but I seriously doubt it. Part 1 has set a pace that leaves the narrative collapsing under the weight of everything it's trying to accomplish. If the economics are what ran the show into an early grave, then rewriting the final season to match the initial pace and tone of Season 1 should have been the priority, not packing as many new characters and subplots in as 120 minutes can fit. If you have less time, you adjust your story. Sacrificing quality for quantity is a poor excuse for bad storytelling. If you can't fund 5 seasons, then rewrite your story to fit the single season you have left. And yes, that's easier said than done, but it's better to focus on the most important story you have to tell than it is to waste your precious screen time trying to tell too much. I guess we'll just have to wait for part 2 to see how things turn out. Thanks for getting to the end of this downer of a video. I don't mean to sound like an absolute hater, because I really do love this show. It's because I'm so invested that I can't help but be disappointed by the drop in quality, and I hope that passion will reach you more than my hater-ass attitude. If you liked this season, this video wasn't for you. I don't need to convince you not to like the show. This video is mostly intended to reach those of you who felt disappointed by the way things turned out, and to record my own many thoughts on the subject. That's enough for today, though. Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to smash that subscribe.